here in the London borough of Tower Hamlets, where British teenagers Shamima Begum, Khadija Sultana and Amira Abbasi left 5 years ago to join the Islamic State in Syria. Their stories gripped the nation as the self-styled caliphate gained prominence all over the world. They were dubbed as jihadi brides by the mainstream media, which soon constructed a narrative of the radical Muslim women. Hoda Mutana, a US citizen, and others like Shamima Begum are now fighting for their citizenship after it was revoked by their respective governments. In this report, I'm going to explore the media narrative constructed around women like Begum. I'll explore the socio-demographic gender difference in recruitment, how IS recruit Muslim women in the West, and how government policies have responded to the children of immigrants, all of which were overlooked by the media to discourage humanising the radical Muslim women. The British press were quick to run with the story of Shamima Begum, who left at 15 to join ISIS after she was discovered at Al-Hol camp in Syria in 2019. What many of these journalists and commentators failed to emphasise was that she was just 15. Therefore, could this have been treated more as a child protection issue than a terrorist one?
When we're working with young women, say from working class backgrounds, when we're working with women that are, and young girls that are black or brown, the response from statutory organisations is very different to, say, if we're working with people like Madeleine McCann. I think that's the greatest example we can use, how much money was invested. Yes, Madeleine was a toddler. However, the focus was more on protecting her and finding her. So here we have a young 15-year-old that's exited the country, and nobody seems to find that worrisome. Nobody seems to think that this is a child protection issue. Nobody seems to think that we need to invest money in finding where this young woman has gone.
While these radical Muslim women were making headlines, many had forgotten just how hostile the media narrative was around Muslim women. To provide some context to the history of British press on issues related to Muslims, I direct my questions to Dr. Chris Allen, an associate professor in hate studies in the University of Leicester, who's done extensive research on counter-terrorism and Islamophobia.
If you look back over the last 20 years, one of the things that really comes to the fore is the fact that Muslims and the religion of Islam have been reported overwhelmingly negative in the British mainstream media and in both in broadcast media, but also in the press as well. And when I first started looking into Islamophobia, one of the first things that struck me was the way the kind of paradox that exists was that there was reports done and surveys done about 2005 after the 7/7 bombing attack, and what was found was that the vast majority of people found out, about Muslims and Islam through the media. Look back to 2005, kind of post 7/7. One of the things you saw was that this idea that Muslims present a threat, so present a threat to us, to our way of life, our culture, these kind of things. And up until about 2010, what you saw was that was a violent threat. So it was there was like kind of the threat of terrorism, there was the threat of violence, and these date back to kind of Islamophobic tropes from history around Muslims being barbaric and violent, wanting to engage in war all the time. But what we've seen interesting from 2010 is, this idea that actually Muslims present a cultural threat.
Over the years, academics have discussed the push and pull factors involved in recruiting individuals, and it appears it takes more than Nutella and kittens to entice female recruits. Gulfa Ulas, a PhD candidate of international relations at Khas University, has written extensively on the motivation behind why women join ISIS.
Based on identity seeking, sense of belonging, fear, rage, revenge, and so on and so forth. And there's no exception for women and men, actually. But when it comes to females' motivation, there's a romanticism played an important part. Three main elements like sisterhood, romanticism, and the caliphate utopia is so important in recruiting those females.
Often, the psychological aspect of why anyone would join any group is neglected, but dissecting this further can provide context to the many stories we come across on the media.
There are three components, basically. There is the motivation to be great, to find meaning in life, to do something important, to count, to matter. The second is the narrative, the language, the ideological story that tells you what to do in order to be great. The radical narrative tells you you're going to be great and glamorous and heroic much faster. You don't have to climb this difficult hill of a career. You can just join us, join the militant organization, fight the enemies of Islam, sacrifice yourself, and then you'll be rewarded by going to paradise, meeting the Prophet, meeting other heroes of Islam, and so on and so forth. And the third element, so there is the need to be significant, to matter, the narrative that tells you how to be significant. And the third element is the network, the social network. People who you respect, who convince you that this is the way to go. Because as social beings, we are inserted, embedded in a social network of people who we respect. We are social beings. So that network of people who we respect, the leaders, the charismatic clerics, our friends and family who may support that kind of narrative, convince us that the narrative is right and push us to that way of radicalism and extremism.
The International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation has estimated that 4,761 of the 41,490 who have fled from Western states to join ISIS by July 2018 were women, in addition to 4,640 minors. The ICSR report categorises infants, children and teenagers between the ages of 15 to 17 years as minors and acknowledges that children who are either born in IS territory or brought by their parents at a young age should be considered primarily as victims. The report argues that for older children, factors such as indoctrination and training are likely to play a role, as grooming or coercion should be considered in their affiliation to IS. However, Gina Vale, a research fellow at the ICSR Centre, highlights that the media framing young adolescents' indoctrination as a matter of grooming denies agency of individuals who are recruited to IS and frames their recruitment as a matter of a power dynamic. In many cases, those assumed to be groomed are female, whereas media language frames males within political and ideological reasoning. She explains, "This reflects greater societal gender bias in our assumptions and expectations of women and girls to be the more non-violent, caring, nurturing sex for whom any allegiance to a violent organisation must be provided logical explanation to exceptionalise it." However, what has garnered more attention in recent months is the discussion around Ms. Begum's citizenship, which goes beyond the newspaper headlines.
We have to understand how citizenship is not just a passport. Citizenship is actually about belonging and being wanted in the country in which you live. At the moment, we're in a big debate around intersectionality, that they all come together: race, faith, culture, gender, sexuality. But what the media doesn't know how to do is pull them apart and see the intricacies and the nuances of people's lives.
Many have argued that bringing ISIS-affiliated individuals home poses a national security concern. However, citizenship deprivation could provide greater challenges.
It's also often very unclear what the exact effect of nationality deprivation is on national security and on countering terrorism. And also concerns have been voiced over international security and how deprivation of nationality as a counterterrorism measure actually relates to international security and cooperation between states, because effectively it leads to a situation where people are being abandoned in the territory of another state by their state of nationality or former nationality, which leads to the export of risks. And that actually might be counter-effective. When we look at the provisions that have been made with regard to deprivation of nationality as a national security measure in mostly Western countries, we do see that some countries only target persons who possess more than one nationality, so that the person does not become stateless when he or she is deprived of nationality. And as such, citizens who also hold another nationality may be subject to deprivation of nationality. as a national security or counterterrorism measure, which then creates a distinction between those persons who only possess one nationality and persons who have dual or multiple nationality. And that is actually problematic.
In July, the Court of Appeal ruled that Begum should be allowed to return to the UK to fight the decision to remove her British citizenship. If this stands, the concerns are the implications it has on the UK's policies of excluding some British-born IS supporters by depriving them of nationality once they're outside of the UK.
It's very unusual. In the citizenship context, not really. The UK has been doing this for some time now. But what we can really kind of think about in relation to Shamima Begum is that it's in the new era, kind of post 9/11 era, in the UK counterterrorism security era, that this is an extension of other measures that have been applied to, let's say, non-citizens or those who've been kind of othered, who are not seen as fully British. So she's simply seen as not fully British. The word security is applied as a very sort of general and neutral word. It's the UK government, Sajid Javid, when he was stripping Shamima of her citizenship, would say that this is to protect our values, to protect our country, to protect our national security. Security sounds like a lovely thing, right? We all want to feel secure. National security or security is a really ambiguous and contestable term. We're never fully secure. So national security is always applied in this like very blunt way. The UK, in the last 10 years and beyond, we've heard a lot about British values, our values. This is a kind of, I would call it a racialized nationalist language, right? Which emphasizes Britishness. And we see what Britishness means in Shamima Begum's context, because Shamima Begum is British, but she has been de-Britishized by whatever her actions were that she was taken. That's the justification, but actually it's really her Bangladeshi citizenship, her foreignness, or her heritage that have made her non-British.
Shamima Begum may have become a social pariah in the eyes of the media, but her story has provoked a wider debate around Islamophobia, Britishness, citizenship, government policies and national security. Her journey reflects the stories of many women who have flown to Syria, but the failure to understand why and how they got there is to overlook everything that dehumanizes them.